the hybrid child, forbidden love. The median spire was meant to be nothing more than a political tool, a cold machine of steel and regulation, orbiting silently between the borders of the Terran Union and the Vaelori Concord. It was a station built for compromise, not beauty. Yet when the pale light of Icarus moon struck its polished hull, and when its stacked rings glowed against the endless black, the spire became something more, a cathedral of fragile peace, suspended in the dark sea of space. On this fragile stage arrived Ambassador Amara Qureshi, a human chosen to carry the weight of centuries of mistrust and the slim hope of a future without war. She was sharp, determined, trained to walk corridors filled with suspicion. But even she felt the weight pressing down as the spire trembled beneath her feet. It was not fear. It was something else, a vibration, a sound. It began with a tremor, subtle at first, a note too pure, too sharp, threading through the station's bones. The sound crept into the walls, into the air, and into the hearts of those who walked the halls. Machines groaned, regulators strained, and humans staggered under a weight they could not name. And then the sound grew louder. A song that Vaelori called it resonance. Their voices were not mere speech, but instruments of power, tools that could bend matter and soothe the bones of their And here, on the human-made spire, one young Vaelori sang without restraint. His voice lashed out at the hull, forcing the station to obey his will, not caring that the spire structure was never meant to bend to alien harmonics. Alarms wailed, guards shouted, diplomats fled the chamber, but Amara did not. She ran toward the sound, toward the source of danger, and there, on a gantry bathed in the light of failing stabilizers, she saw him. A young alien, his face alight with defiance, pouring out a note that split the air like glass. She shouted over the roar, her human voice raw, demanding that he stop before the spire tore itself apart. But he did not hear. War would not hear. And then, from the far side of the chamber, another voice rose, clearer, stronger, balanced like a blade. It cut through the chaos, wove around the violent note, and tamed it. The spire steadied, the trembling eased, and the singer fell silent. From the shadows stepped a figure Amara knew only from her briefings, a name spoken in hushed tones by both admirers and enemies. Seren of House Air, Vaelori Prince, scholar of resonant geometry, second son of the ruling line. His presence commanded silence, and when his eyes met hers, Amara felt as though the very air between them shifted. Their first meeting was not words, but an exchange of hands, her human hand extended instinctively, his alien touch warm, dry, curious. For a moment, it was as though the galaxy itself held its breath. Later, when the chaos had subsided, Seren found her again, not in the bright halls of politics, but in the machine closets of the spire, where pipes hummed and soundproof walls kept secrets safe. There, amid shadows and silence, they spoke, not as enemies, not even as diplomats, but as two souls weary of the games their elders played. He spoke of fear, how the Vaeloris saw humanity as reckless, evolving too quickly, rewriting themselves faster than empires could measure. She spoke of hope, how humans believed in building scaffolds out of lies until they could be made true. And in the stillness, their words became something more than politics. They became dangerous. Night after night, they found each other, in arboretum rings where stars glowed through glass, in rehearsal halls where choirs mangled songs of unity, in service corridors where no one dared to follow. They asked questions no elder dared speak aloud. What if humans and Vaelori were not destined to remain enemies? What if the future demanded more than fear? It was not sudden. Love never is. It grew in the quiet moments, the way she laughed when he tried human tea and hated the steam. The way he explained that Vaelori cloaks were always pinned to the right shoulder because the left was closest to the heart. They built an atlas of differences that did not divide but fascinated, weaving a bridge no treaty had managed to lay down. But the galaxy does not forgive easily. Even as their hands found each other in shadows, elders on both sides sharpened their tongues. Rumors spread like cracks through glass, and Amara and Seren knew that what they had was forbidden, that if they were discovered, it would not only end their lives, but perhaps shatter the fragile peace the spire represented. Yet in their hearts, the decision was already made. They had tasted what was possible when two voices joined without permission, and there was no unmaking it. As Seren once told her, confluence cannot be unformed, and so, on a night when choirs practiced songs of unity that fell apart under their own weight, Amara and Seren stood side by side in the shadows, fingers brushing along a rail, knowing the galaxy would condemn them for this moment. And still, they did not let go, because sometimes it is not treaties or fleets that shape history. Sometimes it is a single choice, a single bond, a single forbidden love, and in that bond, unseen and unspoken, the future of humanity and the galaxy was already beginning to change. Birth of the child asterisk the spire had returned to its routine. Fleets passed, treaties were argued, and the elders walked its halls as if nothing had changed. But deep inside the quiet chambers of the station, something had indeed changed, something so small, so fragile, and yet so powerful that it could unmake the galaxy. Amara Korechi, ambassador of the Terran Union, stared at the pale glow of the medical console as the words burned into her mind. Pregnancy confirmed, genetic markers, hybridization detected. The medics whispered in disbelief. They called it impossible, unnatural, a violation of every chart and law they had ever studied. But the evidence was before them. She was carrying a child, not wholly human, not wholly something new when she first told Seren. His eyes did not widen, Vaelori eyes could not, but his resonance faltered, and the steady harmony beneath his skin turned into dissonance. He stood frozen, torn between awe and fear, until she took his hand and pressed it against her stomach. "Our child," she whispered. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, with a fierceness she had never seen in him before, Seren said, "Then we protect it. Against my elders, against yours, against the galaxy itself. But galaxies have ears, and secrets, especially the dangerous kind, are never safe for long." The first whispers spread among the spire's medics, then to the aides, then to the markets and mess halls. "A hybrid child," they said. Proof that humans and Vaelori could mix. Some laughed, calling it a rumor. Some shuddered in horror, calling it heresy. And some began to plot. One evening, Amara walked the arboretum ring, the artificial light dim, leaves glowing faintly like lanterns in the half-gravity. She thought she was alone. She was not. A figure detached from the shadows, faceless, silent, holding not a soldier's rifle but a surgeon's blade. His strike was not aimed at her heart. It was aimed at her womb. But before the blade could fall, a voice split the air. Seren, his resonance, shattered the silence. A note so sharp it bent the assassin's balance and sent the weapon clattering to the floor. Guards came running, but by then the would-be killer was writhing on the ground, pinned by invisible cords of sound. Amara clutched her stomach, her breath shaking, and she understood this was not just their child. It was already a battlefield. The assassination attempt only made the whispers louder. To some, the hybrid was a miracle proof of unity, a bridge between races. To others, it was a curse, a corruption of purity. Elders in the Vaelori Concord called for cleansing. Generals in the Terran Union demanded the child be seized and studied. Both sides feared what it meant, and both sides prepared to act. Armies do not always march on planets. Sometimes they march on ideas, and this child had become the most dangerous idea in the galaxy. Amara and Seren withdrew into the hidden veins of the spire. They met in maintenance shafts, in the quiet between reactors, in chambers where no one dared to follow. Amara felt the changes in her body with each passing day, and Seren stood beside her, his resonance steady, even when his people called him traitor. He told her once, his voice low, "The Concord will never accept this. They fear change more than death. And the Union?" She asked. "They fear being left behind," he said. But when she felt the child stir for the first time, Amara knew one truth. It did not matter what the councils feared. What grew inside her was not a weapon, not a bargaining chip, not a curse. It was life. It was love, given form. And no empire, no elder, no assassin could take that from them. Yet the galaxy was moving. Fleets gathered at the Cerulean Gate, their commanders speaking of precautions. Factions split within the Concords, some whispering of abomination, others of prophecy. Human colonies divided between those who wanted the child destroyed, and those who wanted it crowned as proof of humanity's destiny. The spire became a fortress of secrets. Every corridor carried rumors. Every shadow might hide a spy. And in the heart of it all, Amara and Seren clung to one another, knowing that their love had already remade the world. When the next attempt came, it was not a single assassin. It was a faction, a team of operatives, human and Vaelori both, who had set aside their rivalry for one shared goal, to erase the child before it could be born. They struck in the depths of the station's core, where power conduits glowed and the air vibrated with energy. The fight was not fought with guns alone. It was fought with resonance and words, with desperation and fury. And when it ended, when the assassins lay defeated and the conduits still hummed with power, Amara pressed her trembling hands to her stomach and whispered to the life within, "You are more than they will ever understand, and we will keep you safe." The child had not yet been born, but already it had changed everything. The Terran Union and the Vaelori Concord were preparing for war, not over planets, not over trade, not over borders, but over a single unborn child. And in the quiet after the battle, Seren held Amara close and said the words that echoed through her soul. "The galaxy may see a weapon. The galaxy may see a threat, but to me, this is only our child, and I will burn the stars themselves before I let them take it from us." The child's gift *, the birth did not happen in a palace, nor on the surface of a proud homeworld. It happened in the hidden heart of the Median spire, far below the chambers of diplomats and the halls of power. Amara lay beneath the glow of sterile lamps, Seren at her side, his resonance humming low like a lullaby. The medics were silent, half in fear, half in awe. When the first cry came, it was not just sound, it was a wave that rippled through the chamber. bending the air, shivering through steel. Every console blinked, every light flickered, every machine trembled, as if the newborn voice had reached into their cores and reminded them that they, too, were alive. The child opened its eyes. Not fully human, not fully valorous, something in between. The irises shimmered, reflecting human warmth, yet fractured like crystal facets. The cry rose again, and this time it was softer, calmer, almost melodic. The newborn's resonance soothed the air around it, steadying the machines it had unsettled. The medics fell to their knees, whispering. Some called it blessed, others cursed, but all agreed nothing like this had ever lived before. For Amara, the world narrowed to that fragile body pressed against her chest, its warmth, its tiny breath. For Seren, the resonance sang deeper. He felt the harmony within the child, not trained, not deliberate, but instinctive, an echo of both their species and something more. Tears filled his alien eyes, and his voice trembled as he whispered, "Our child. Our impossible child." But the galaxy did not wait long to react. News spread beyond the spire, beyond the fleets at Cerulean Gate. Rumors leaped from star to star faster than light. A hybrid child had been born, the first of its kind. And suddenly, every throne, every council, every military fleet demanded to know, what does it mean? The Terran Union split in two. One faction claimed the child must be protected, nurtured, raised as a symbol of unity. Another demanded it be taken, studied, dissected if necessary, to unlock whatever secrets it held. To them, it was not a baby. It was a key perhaps to humanity's future dominance, perhaps to its extinction. The Vaelori Concord reacted with sharper cruelty. The elders of Seren's house denounced him, stripping his titles, branding him oath. They called the child an abomination, a dangerous deviation from their sacred resonance. Some whispered darker words that the child's existence might unravel the very laws that bound Vaelori society together. They demanded its destruction, but others were moved. Pilgrims came in secret, Vaelori youth who had grown weary of elder law. They brought offerings, they sang soft lullabies outside the chambers where Amara and Seren hid, believing the hybrid was no curse but a messiah. Among humans too, there were whispers of prophecy-old earth legends of a child who would unite warring tribes. Retold now as a myth reborn in the stars, the child grew quickly, faster than any human infant. By 3 months, it was standing, toddling with unsteady steps through the arboretum ring. By 6, it spoke, not in full sentences, not in human words, nor Vaelori song, but in harmonies, tones, and fragments of thought that carried meaning even when no translation bead could interpret them. When Amara touched its hand, she felt its thoughts brush against hers like warm currents. When Seren held it close, his resonance aligned, and for the first time he realized the child was not just learning from them, it was teaching them. One night, when fleets clashed in orbit, testing each other's readiness, the child woke crying, but its cry was not fear. It was power. The sounds spread through the spire, and every soldier, human and Vaelori alike, froze. Their weapons trembled in their hands. Their anger drained like water through sand. Some fell to their knees, weeping, unable to explain why. It lasted only a moment, but in that moment, the child had done what no elder, no council, no army had ever achieved. It had silenced war with a single note, and suddenly the galaxy understood the truth. This child was not just a symbol. It was a force, a living will that could bend hearts, soothe fury, and bend machines with the resonance of its voice. From that day, the factions grew more desperate. Priests declared the hybrid a divine messenger. Generals called it a weapon of mass influence. Assassins sharpened their blades. Scholars begged for access. Every power wanted the child for themselves. But in the quiet of their hidden quarters, Amara and Seren held their child close. They saw none of those things. Not Messiah, not weapon, not prophecy. Only a life they had created together. Only love, fragile and fierce, bound in the small form of their child. And as they watched it sleep, its breath rising and falling, they both knew one truth. Whatever the galaxy believed, whatever it demanded, this child was not theirs to own. It was the future itself. And the future does not bow to kings or councils. It sings its own song. The galactic crisis, asterisk, they said. The Cerulean Gate had never looked heavier. Fleets from 2 civilizations hung around it like arguments held at knife point. Human carriers dark as thunderhead. Vaelori dreadships glimmering like cut glass. And in between them a crown of satellites jittering with the frantic patience of diplomats. Beneath that cold ballet of metal and intent, the median spire turned in its measured arc, pretending as stations due to be only a place, not a promise. But a promise it was, and a fragile one, and the galaxy was running out of time to keep it, below decks where politics wears work clothes. The spire's service corridors hummed with rumors that moved faster than the air, that the Union had empowered a shadow council to seize the child, that house heir had fractured beyond repair, that priests from 3 alien worlds had arrived with relics and questions, and soldiers from 10 had arrived with answers and guns. In that maze of metal and breath, Amara and Seren kept their world small. 3 rooms, 2 hearts, 1 sleeping child. They measured days not by alarms but by the rise and fell of a tiny chest. The soft syllables that were not quite words and yet filled the room with meaning. Outside their door, history rehearsed its speeches. Inside, love rehearsed its courage. When the summons came, it wore a polite face. A delegation request. A preliminary convocation for a framework of de-escalation. Words that had been ironed flat until they squeaked. Amara looked at the Sealy Union emerald braided with Vaelori. Opland felt the old ache of duty stir. Seren read the cadence of the message. The hum under the ink that did not belong to either language, and said, very softly, "They will place us at the center and ask us to be still while they move the room." "Then we will not be still," Amara replied, and the decision settled between them like a keel finding water. They would go. They would carry their child into the hall no map could chart. They would go because hiding had purchased them only a larger hunt, and because sometimes the only way to keep a promise is to walk straight into the mouth that wants to swallow it. The hall of convergence was full before they arrived. Human admirals studied lines of light that pretended to be ships. Vaelori elders stood in a formation that translated for those who knew the grammar. 2, we are listening, which often means we are deciding what to refuse. The Akara miners, who had learned patience under rock, filled the back rows with a steadiness that made even generals breathe easier. And above them all, like a cold moon, the gate's telemetry unfolded into 1,000 small warnings. They entered without entourage, Amara in dark cloth, unadorned, Seren in a cloak pinned modestly, titles stripped but posture unbowed. The child pressed against Amara's shoulder, eyes wide and unafraid. one hand reaching periodically for the air as if reminding it of a tune it had promised to keep. A murmur moved through the hall, curiosity braided with dread. The sound tilted toward anger and cracked into reverence, then settled, as all such sounds do, into silence when it remembered it was being watched. A Union elder spoke first, all gravel and measured sorrow. Ambassador Qureshi, Seren of Air, we are here to prevent catastrophe, which is to say, his tone confessed. We are here to prevent something we fear from changing us. A Vaelori matriarch answered, voice like cool stone. We are here to restore order, which is to say, we are here to put the furniture back where we left it. Even if the house has changed. Amara stepped to the circle where the lights made a suggestion of center. You are here because a child was born, she said, and because neither of you know how to love a future you did not invent. 1,000 breaths took the shape of a fence. Seren let his resonance rise just enough to smooth those breaths back into listening. We will not surrender our child to study, he said. We will not permit its life to be drafted into your wars. We will not let your fear use our love as its spine. An admiral's mouth made the shape of patience. Prince Seren, ambassador, this is not about you. This is about the balance of powers. The hybrid's effect on machines, on minds represents strategic leverage. If one side controls it, if Amara said, and smiled sadly, that tiny word that makes cages big enough to hold empires. From the Vaelori seats came a tremor of song, disapproval. Ritual, the low-chord elders, intone when the young have asked a question the law has not rehearsed. The child is an error, said a matriarch. The law calls errors to be corrected. Seren turned to her and, for the first time in that hall, bowed like a son. Mother, he said, and the word cost him a small cut you could hear if you knew where to listen. The law is a house we sing round truth. When truth moves, the house must learn new. Walls, something in the hall exhaled that had been holding its breath since before any of them were. Born, the negotiation that followed was not a conversation, but a choreography of almosts. Proposals that almost acknowledged the child's humanity. Demands that almost admitted they were demands. Guarantees that almost meant safety. Through it all, the child watched, eyes bright, head turning as if the room were a flock of slow birds. Once, when a human general's temper tried to climb the air, the child made a sound without opening its mouth, and the temper forgot what it had been hurrying toward. The stalemate finally did what stalemates eventually do. It hired violence. It entered through a maintenance door, wearing the uniform of a man paid to keep wires honest. It carried a tool case that did not hold tools. It moved like someone who has been told exactly which square to stand on to cast the longest shadow. The first explosion was small, a courtesy blast meant to panic without killing, a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence no one wanted to admit they were writing. Lights flared. The room scattered into instinct. Amara moved without thinking. The body memory of 1,000 drills crashing into the soft, older memory of a mother. Shield the child. Find Seren. Put your back against something that remembers you. Seren's resonance leapt, wrapping the space around them into a pocket of stillness where shrapnel remembered its duty to be slow. Security swarmed. The Akara miners formed a wall with the simple logic of people who have learned that stone is a promise you keep with your spine. And for a handful of heartbeats it looked as if the room might survive the sentence it had summoned. Then the second blast came. Larger, uglier, hungry for consequence. The child reached out. A hand no larger than a prayer, and the sound that left its body was not a note so much as a decision. It rolled through the hall and turned detonation into wind, rage into weight, momentum into reconsideration. The blast broke itself on that invisible reef, and what would have been a slaughter became a rain of sorry metal. For a moment, one of those long, thin moments that thread themselves through history, every person in that hall understood the same thing at the same time. They were standing near a future that would not be bullied. Even the assassin understood. He dropped to his knees, not from piety, but because the ground had suddenly remembered gravity more strongly underneath him. Security dragged him away. The lights remembered how to be calm. The admirals remembered how to be composed. The elders remembered how to be displeased. The miners remembered how to be tired. And in the little eddy at the center of the room, a mother and a father remembered how to breathe. Afterward, the council changed keys. It spoke in softer phrases, placed its threats behind curtains, offered shelters with doors that only locked from the outside. Amara and Saren declined them all. "You are asking us to give you our child," Amara said. "You may call the building a sanctuary, but the word you are avoiding is cage. Then what do you propose?" The elder's voice had that clean, dangerous tone bureaucrats use when they have decided to win by renaming loss. Saren answered. "A path you do not know yet how to draw. A council greater than this room, called not to apportion power, but to hear truth. Not just your elders and ours, but those you pretend are not listening. Miners and mothers, pilots and poets, the quiet majority that lives the consequences of the words you polish. You suggest a convocation of the unqualified," the admiral said, and the word unqualified shivered with the kind of fear only men in uniforms feel when asked to stand somewhere without a rank to hold them up. "I suggest a music you have forgotten how to hear," Saren replied. "Let the galaxy decide whether the child is an error or an answer, and let the child speak for itself." The room recoiled at that last sentence. Children do not speak in such rooms. They are spoken about. But the child had already changed physics once that morning. It reached for Saren's cloak, pressed its face briefly against Amara's neck, and then, with the confidence of the newly walking, took 3 steps into the circle where chancellors pretend truth is closer to them than to others. It did not speak a word. It made a sound small enough to fit in a cradle and large enough to move a fleet. And the sound said, because sometimes sounds do that you are afraid, because you remember what hope costs. There are moments when institutions become people again. The hall felt its armor loosen. Agreement did not happen that day. It is not the job of old power to agree quickly with new meanings. But 2 things changed. First, the fleets at the gate stood down a quarter notch, enough that captains slept without fingers on triggers. Second, the date was set. A great convocation. Not here on a neutral station, but in the open, transmitted through the gate to every ship that could see. Carried on channels usually rented to distance and weather. The elders called it theater. Amara called it air. Saren called it risk. The child called it nothing at all. It only smiled, a small, tired smile, and fell asleep against its mother's heart. In the days that followed, the spire learned the cruel patience of countdowns. Preparations turned the halls into a map of intentions. The child practiced walking longer corridors. Amara practiced saying no with fewer syllables. Saren practiced holding 2 truths in his mouth at once. That he loved his mother, and that she was wrong enough to hurt galaxies. Miko, who had collected paperwork like seashells his whole life, collected courage instead. He moved between offices and shadows, trading favors for silence, and silence for corridors that would be empty. When empty mattered, not all corridors stayed empty. Some learned new feet. On the eve of the convocation, as the spire dimmed its lights the way it does when it wants the creatures inside it to remember that stars are older than bulbs, Amara stepped into the arboretum ring and found the assassin waiting where trees pretend to be calm. He had no blade this time. He had a question, brittle and bewildered and almost human. "What do you think it will be?" "A child," Amara said, "because sometimes the only answer large enough to embarrass hate is the small one it forgot." He nodded as if that had always been the problem. "They told me it was a weapon. Weapons are easier. Weapons don't look back." "Then stop looking away," she said. He left his orders in the soil like a pair of footprints and went to find a smaller story to live. Not all enemies were that ready to be wrong. House Heir's hardliners sent a message pinned to an ultimatum. If the child spoke publicly, their ships would sing the gate into pain. In answer, 1,000 Vaelori youths recorded themselves singing old lullabies into cheap transmitters and flooded the channels with tenderness. The elders tried to call it noise. The harmonics disagreed. The Union's Shadow Council tried one last gambit. They offered Amara a bargain shaped like mercy: go into hiding, witness protection, scaled up to a star and let the galaxy conclude what it wished. "No one can hurt what they cannot find," said the man who believed that. Amara looked at her child, at Seren, at the little universe their three bodies made when they stood close enough to share warmth, and said, "We were found the day we chose each other. We have been found ever since." Dawn came in, artificial word for when the station aligns its light with a mood, and with it a river of bodies moving toward the hall. Miners in dust-stained suits, pilots with eyes full of blue distances, Vaelori students who had cut their cloaks into new shapes, priests, poets, cooks, engineers, children held high so small faces could see large decisions. Outside the viewports, ships edged forward like shy animals learning to drink from the same stream. Amara and Seren walked at the slow pace of people carrying a world. The child rode on Amara's hip, one hand tangled in Seren's cloak. They passed guards who pretended not to bless them. They passed elders who pretended not to beg gods they barely believed in. They passed Miko, who pretended not to cry by making his clipboard heavy. The hall opened like a held breath. Sound gathered, the way sound does before it remembers whether it will be used to break or mend. Amara stepped to the center. Seren stood beside her. The child, who had slept through history before and would again, lifted its face and looked not at the elders, not at the admirals, not at the cameras, but at the space above them where the gate's light painted the air with maps older than laws. Amara spoke, and her voice carried the unglamorous heroism of those who have typed peace into existence at 3 in the morning. "We bring you no weapon. We bring you no prophecy. We bring you our child. You may call it error. We call it promise. You may call it threat. We call it tomorrow. You cannot disarm a tomorrow. You can only meet it with your hands open." Seren followed, and his resonance braided her words into something that fit both human ears and Vaelori bones. "The law is a house," he said again, "and houses must grow, or they become museums for ghosts. Today, we ask you to add a room." He looked at his mother. She looked back. And in that look, an entire history bowed its head not in surrender, not in defeat, but in the respectful fatigue of a generation passing a weight to hands. that had not dropped anything yet. It was time. The child stepped forward. The room leaned in. Somewhere far above, a dozen captains placed their palms on cool steel and waited for a sound to tell them whether they were fighting men or fathers today. The child opened its mouth. The note that came was small enough to hide in a pocket and large enough to survive being carried across a vacuum. It found metal and taught it kindness. It found uniforms and taught them humility. It found laws and taught them where to bend without breaking. It found 1,000 private griefs and laid a hand on each ears. Even warriors have them, though they keep them in pockets without names. It did not command. It did not plead. It simply offered a shape the future could live inside without pinching. Silence followed, the good kind, the kind that makes room. The admirals were the first to understand. They stood their fleets down, a heartbeat, then another, waiting to see if the sky would fall differently. The elders understood next, which is to say they understood last. They discovered that their hands had already unclenched while they were rehearsing the speech in which they explained why they would not unclench. The miners understood best. They had heard rocks sing and knew when a note meant work and when it meant home. But history is not kind enough to fit itself into one clean moment. While the whole relearned listening, a sliver of the old world tried to make itself heard with fire. A coded burst from the rim called a Vaelori hardliner wing to light engines. A Union black cell answered by waking 3 sleeping weapons near the gate's throat. Screens flared. Officers shouted. The room's attention tore. The child swayed, as if a wind only it could feel had changed direction. Saren caught it, steadying. Amara lifted her gaze to the chaos embroidered on the walls. Not today, she said, not to the elders, not to the admirals, not even to the crowd, but to that stubborn piece of the past that keeps trying the same trick in new uniforms. Not anymore, the child breathed 1 to 3 on the gate's telemetry. All those fussy lines and quarrelsome warnings softened like a fist remembering it had once been a hand. Engines throttled back without orders. The sleeping weapons went on remembering sleep. The hardliner wing found itself singing a formation pattern their grandparents had used to welcome ships home from storms. Somewhere a general laughed, short and astonished, like a man who has been spared a story he had already begun to regret telling. The whole did not erupt. It settled. Not victory, not peace. Something more honest, a truce with tomorrow. When the noise of it had thinned to breath, Amara spoke one last time. The convocation is not over because this moment is beautiful, she said. It is over because the next work must begin. Laws rewritten, corridors shared, schools built where voices learn each other's shapes. We will stand there too, but we will not stand there alone. She looked out across the faces and found because mothers do every possible, danger hiding in the edges, and every possible ally pretending to be a stranger. Those who would take our child will have to walk through more than our bodies. They will have to walk through yours. For once, the crowd did not cheer. It nodded, 1,000 small vows being signed in bone. When they finally stepped off the circle, Miko met them with a grin that had learned to be brave while no one was looking. You realize, he said, you've scheduled me 10 years of paperwork. 15, Amara said, and kissed his cheek like a sister who knows where the jokes live. Saren's mother approached, cloak heavy with old decisions. She stood at a distance that was both kindness and confession. I did not know how to sing this, she said, which was as large an apology as her grammar permitted. Saren bowed not as a prince, not as a supplicant, but as a son who has decided to love someone longer than anger is good at staying. "Help us build the room," he said. She did not answer. She did not need to. He could hear the studs going up in her silence. The fleets drifted a little farther apart, the way people do when they are trying not to crowd a door. The gate shed its anxiety and returned to being a circle that belongs chiefly to mathematics. The spire stopped patient. Spire returned to its slow turning. A machine that had hosted a miracle and now had to learn how to keep the lights on after miracles. That night, in the smallness they had reclaimed from a too large day, Amara held the child and listened to its breath. Seren sat nearby, repairing a toy that had decided to be two toys. They did not speak of councils or fleets. They spoke of milk and sleep and the way the child's hand had found the rail again, as if remembering a night when hands had shaped the future in the dark. "Tomorrow?" Seren asked, with a tired smile. "Tomorrow," Amara said. Outside, the galaxy turned. Not safe, not solved, but turning, this time, around a point that did not need to be conquered to be real. And somewhere, far off, where signals arrive thin and late, a species none of them had met, yet listened to the convocation's echo and said, in a language that tastes like rain, "Perhaps we will visit after all." The crisis had not ended. It had ripened. The reckoning would be Act V's work. The treaties, the betrayals yet to confess themselves, the final attempt of old fear to wear new armor. But a hinge had been found, and the door had moved, and the child, small, drowsy, stubbornly alive, had already begun to hum the next room into being. Destiny, asterisk, asterisk, the great convocation had been promised as a council. In truth, it was a battlefield disguised as ceremony. Across the galaxy, every channel carried its light. Ships halted in orbit to watch, colonies huddled around projection screens, and in the deepest mines of Akara, dust-stained workers leaned close to battered receivers, waiting for history to speak. The hall was vast, lit by the glow of the cerulean gate, its walls lined with human admirals, Vaelori elders, pilgrims, priests, and 1,000 citizens who had come not to listen, but to witness. Amara entered with Seren at her side, their child carried between them. No banners marked their path, no guards flanked their steps, and yet the room fell silent as though an emperor had arrived, for in the fragile heartbeat of that hall, everyone understood. The future they feared and longed for had arrived in the arms of a mother and father. The Union spoke first, its elder's voice heavy with politics. The hybrid is destabilization incarnate. To allow it freedom is to gamble with every life under our charge. The Concord replied in tones sharpened by tradition. The child is an abomination against resonance. It is a flaw that must be corrected before it sings a ruin into us all. Each side threw words like stones, the hall becoming a storm of fear wrapped in authority. But Amara's voice cut through the storm. "You call it a weapon. You call it a curse. But I call it my child, my son, my daughter, flesh of my flesh, song of Seren's bones. And you fear it because it is more honest than any of you." The hall stirred. Some murmured in agreement. Others hissed. Seren added his voice, rich and resonant. "The law is a house, and houses must grow. If you kill this child, you kill the future itself, and the galaxy will remember who struck the blow." The debate fractured. Some elders demanded custody. Admirals whispered of preemptive strikes. Priests demanded sanctification. And in the chaos, The child, small, fragile, impossibly slipped from Amara's arms and toddled to the center of the chamber. The hall froze. Every eye turned as the hybrid raised its head. It did not speak in words. It sang, a note small, perfect, unshaped by training rows, and filled the chamber. It was not loud, yet it reached every ear, every bone, every heart. To the miners, it was the sound of stone becoming safe. To soldiers, it was the memory of mothers calling them home. To admirals, it was the truth of victories they had won but never celebrated. To elders, it was the law reminding them that it had once been written by children. The note rippled outward, carried on the convocation's channels, leaping between ships and colonies. Across the stars, people felt it. Some wept, some laughed. Some simply fell silent, realizing they had been carrying fears too old to name. Then the note shifted. For a heartbeat, the cerulean gate itself shimmered, its colossal rings bending to the sound. The great engines of humanity and the ancient harmonics of the Vaelori pulsed together, not in war, but in rhythm. The fleets that had been ready to fire found themselves standing down, captains stunned, crews unable to explain why their hands refused to obey orders of destruction. And then silence fell. The heavy kind, the kind that arrives after truth has spoken. The assassin was the last echo of the old world. He rose from the shadows, blade drawn, desperate to fulfill a promise to those who feared too deeply. He lunged not at Amara, not at Saren, but at the child. But before steel could find its mark, the child's song broke again. Not a cry, not a wail, a simple hum. The blade froze mid-strike, the assassin's hand trembling as if bound by invisible chains. And then he dropped the weapon, tears streaking his face. "It looks at me," he whispered. "It sees me." There was no applause, no cheer, only a quiet understanding that something greater than war had just been born into the galaxy. Amara lifted the child once more. "You cannot kill this," she said. "You cannot cage it. This is not prophecy. This is not a weapon. This is life, and life will not bend to your fear." Saren placed his hand on hers. Today the galaxy must choose, to cling to fear, or to follow the song of tomorrow. The convocation adjourned, not with signatures, not with treaties, but with silence. Silence that meant surrender. Silence that meant hope. And when the lights dimmed and the ships drifted apart, every species knew the truth. The future now belonged to the hybrid child. That night, as the spire turned once more above Ikra's pale moon, Amara and Saren watched their child sleep. They had not ended war. They had not built peace, but they had planted something deeper, a seed, a song, a reason, and in the farthest reaches of space, unseen civilizations stirred, listening to that song echo across the void. They whispered in languages of light and shadow, "The humans have done the impossible again. They have made the galaxy dream.